some time. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to UBN Q3 webinar, and we're going to talk about what did Zelenskyy just do and what will Putin do. And we would like to remind a few things. First, our general sponsor, Ukraine Business News and Ukraine Business Network general sponsor is Peralv Bank, is your loyal banker in Ukraine. We also would like to announce that on September 11, on Friday, UBN will have a Q3 live event in Kyiv, in Parkovy, as always. And the theme will be the final winter, escalation, ceasefire, and Ukraine's reconstruction. We look forward to see you on September 11. It's exactly 1 month away. So today's webinar, Mark will start first, and after Mark, we will have updates from a Breitbart. Breitbart is a strategic risk and security advisor firm with operations in Ukraine. And we will have updates from a senior risk advisor, Anders Norvald. And after that, we have our key no speaker. We're delighted to have Sir General Rupert Smith, a retired British Army officer and former NATO Deputy Supreme Commander. And he's going to talk about his views on Russian mobilization and the state of the battlefield. So, Mark, the floor is yours.
Great. I will take it from here. Thank you very much for the intro. As Andrew mentioned, I will start here first. I'll try to do this about 25 minutes or so, get to the bottom of the hour, and then hand it over to the next speakers, Anders and Sir General Rupert. So with that, as the title was, we'll try to answer both of these questions, among others. But this has been the focus of what we're hearing every day on the ground here in Kyiv from our clients. What the hell did Zelenskyy do last month? And what will Putin do in the coming months as pressure is increasing dramatically within Russia? So a very positive signal, at least on that end, for Ukraine to date. So we'll try to answer those questions. Since we last spoke, for those of you not in Kyiv and joining the webinar, so from our last webinar in Q2, a lot has happened, of course. The war in Iran, as we said back then, back in March and April, that there is no end in sight, and there remains no end in sight. This has clearly been a strategic disaster for the Trump administration. No end coming that we can see in the coming months, and obviously majorly problematic for Trump in advance of the November midterm elections in the Republican Party. Positively, no major split in the West occurred when you consider we started this year with problems over threats over Greenland, the Hungary elections in April, which went positively for Europe, the European project, and for Ukraine. So we have actually proceeded decently across this year in that regard. And the 90 billion euro loan was finally approved in Q2 after being delayed from last December. So massively important for Ukraine's financing through the end of next year. And we're in the middle. We should know by the end of this month, the beginning of September, if we will get approval from the House of Representatives on new U.S. sanctions on Russia, which could be effective depending on how they become implemented. Also, relatively positively, Putin went to Beijing since the last time we spoke, and definitely expected to get more than he did leaving China. In particular, he wanted a commitment that he's been begging for years from China to help build a new pipeline so Russia could export more gas, redirecting away from the closed Western markets in Europe and to China, and that did not happen. And basically China told him this will never happen, more or less. So not in Russia's favor there. And then within Ukraine, particularly in the last month to 6 weeks, pressures have been accumulating, really rising notably, particularly in the air war. Politics, as usual, is relatively unstable in Ukraine. Things have sort of stabilized since the government reshuffle, but the air war is a massive problem, which we'll go into more detail on. But pressures are also mounting dramatically, I would say, in Russia. And in the last few months, for the first time really since the outset of the full-scale invasion in February 2022, the most of the civilian population, middle class, are now directly feeling the consequences of this war, and they don't like it, and more consequences are coming, which is why we will see what Putin will do in response. So that land and air war is not necessarily going in Russia's direction. There's a political problem emanating from this, and then, of course, the economy has been in considerable contraction, the civilian economy, for the last year and a half consistently, but that's getting worse and worse as we go on. So, to begin with, and this is a good precursor to the words that Sir General Rupert will be sharing with you as well, there are two wars going on here in Ukraine. We'll start with the first one, the internal war, and that relates to Ukraine's strategic direction in terms of becoming more of a Western-oriented nation, or sticking with the old ways, in short. So what did Zelenskyy do to answer the question? No, this wasn't really exclusively or even centrally about corruption. It was more, in reality, about control, stability, and unity, particularly during war. And unfortunately, this completely backfired for him. Now, that said, I also think he likely understood this could potentially backfire. You could get people power, get the people on the streets, and then that actually allowed him to then potentially fire Syrskyi, who Syrskyi has incomparably more power within the system compared to Fedorov, being Commander-in-Chief. And Zelenskyy sided with the more powerful character and the institutions of Syrskyi, at least initially. The people power on the streets then allowed him to actually shift things, fire Syrskyi, and put in a reformer both in Ministry of Defense and as Commander-in-Chief in Drapati, which we'll talk about. This removal of Fedorov, though, it is a broader fight against the existing institutions, the establishment, the old guard, the corrupt networks, of course, which are part of that. So this fight continues, and this is part of Ukraine's orientation towards the West, not just beating Russia in the war, so the external threat, but this is the internal threat. And this is a critical shift. These are some of the first words the day Drapati was appointed as the new commander-in-chief. First steps will be expanding access to effective long-term, et cetera, et cetera. The point is designed to protect soldiers' lives, which is a shift from how the old system was operating under Syrskyi, and something that the military and the people were demanding. So Drapati, he is really representative and a symbol of this new era. Extremely strong reputation within Ukraine, and particularly within the military, far better liked and respected by the military than Syrskyi ever has been. And we're going to really see a cultural shift, and that's the point here. A change in military culture, which doesn't change. Don't think that something's going to somehow shift at the front because of this. But over time, this will help, likely this greater focus on the technological war, on the drone warfare, but also critically changing the culture within the military, which can then, over time, help improve mobilization and recruitment for Ukraine. So positive moves in that direction, but the story is not over. Fedorov is still not reinstated, and so we will see how things develop in the coming weeks. Back to the external war, as mentioned. Ukraine has taken back, and really since about March, April, has taken back quite decisively the strategic advantage in the war. And I say that with the sole exception, unfortunately, of ballistic missile defense, which we are feeling very tangibly on the ground here. The stats are really quite alarming. Nothing like this was happening, say, last year or the year before. 136, just in July, in 1 month, 136 energy targets hit. Electricity down 40%. Sea of Azov, over 120 ships taken out, really impacting the ability to supply not just the civilian population, but the military within Crimea. Across Russia, over $3 billion in damage, hitting 20-some wildberry sites just in the past month. And of course, that is going to continue and accelerate going forward. Now, there's an economic and financial point here, of course. That does impact living standards. It impacts inflation. It has an impact, of course, on how people live. But it also has a major political impact. Russians demand that their leader is perceived as invulnerable, as seen as in control at all times. And this is showing that actually Putin can't protect Russians, which is a critical point to really turn the Russian population and the elites again. That doesn't mean we're going to have a revolution tomorrow, but it means you are quite decisively turning the population and the elites against Putin, making them more open to a potential post-Putin era. On the Ukrainian side, though, we still have a massive problem, which is quite dangerous here on a number of fronts, which I'll get into. On the one hand, we've actually increased dramatically, thanks to Fedorov and his reforms, the interception rate of drones and cruise missiles specifically. So we've made massive improvements there. And consider, going back a year ago, there were major concerns about how we could possibly intercept all of the technological advances that Russia had made related to drones, particularly. And Ukraine met that challenge and has succeeded, frankly. But the problem are the Iskander ballistics specifically, all the ballistic categories that Russia has, but the Iskander missiles, which, as you can see here from the charts, the record set in July, 127 ballistic missiles fired at Ukraine. That's considerably beyond what Russia can produce, but they're taking advantage of this window that they have, knowing that Ukraine no longer basically has much in the way of Patriot interceptors. So this falling interception of the ballistics is a massive problem. In addition, just in the last 10 days, Russia, on 2 separate occasions that we know of, has used missiles from North Korea. We should anticipate that they're going to get more missiles from North Korea, particularly if they're trying to fire over 100 every month, but that's beyond the production rate. So that's obviously a huge problem. And a story that has not been reported enough in the West that is really being missed, but is quite problematic and will likely worsen going forward, is what's happening around Odessa on civilian infrastructure, energy infrastructure across the board, but particularly on the ports and on cargo vessels directly that are being attacked. And now we're seeing huge declines in grain and metals exports out of Ukraine's largest port, of course. And this is causing major problems as a lot of production is now being kept out of markets. Insurance rates are going up, logistics rates are going up. And if this continues, we could see an actual decline in GDP growth for this year, assuming the current trends continue and even accelerate in the months ahead. So quite problematic here. What's the solution? Now, particularly for the ballistic missiles, yes, we've been talking about this Freja project, the anti-ballistic coalition with European partners. We're at least a year away from that. So that's probably the long-term solution here, but that does not help us get through this winter, unfortunately. U.S. Patriot licensing, we've seen this back and forth with Trump. Can't rely on that, most definitely. Even if that started, we'd be probably 2 years away from that having an impact. So the real solution here, according to the experts, is going after the ballistic missile launchers, right? Shoot the archer, not the arrow philosophy here. The problem here is that 2 things: Musk hasn't given approval for this, and the U.S. government does not allow Starlink coverage over Russia. So you'd have to work on Trump and Musk to try to make that happen, which assuredly behind the scenes, Ukrainian politicians are trying to do that. But that's what to watch for here in the coming months, because this will be a massive problem, of course, going into winter. On the other side, so we just handled sort of Ukraine and what Zelenskyy has done, where things are at with Ukraine. For Russia, what will Putin do right after the September elections? We ran this polling at our Q2 event in the beginning of June, so about 2 months ago. And I am certain, having spoken with companies, Andrew can vouch for this as well, that this polling done in June would probably change quite dramatically. And no longer would people think that Putin will continue to delay, which is his typical political posture, but is more likely now to call for a mobilization of some form. And again, I'm Sir General Rupert will have words on this of what mobilization could potentially look like. So what does Putin do then? Nothing. That's probably not really an option anymore. He has fundamentally broken the social contract, basically, with the Russian people, with the economic stagnation, with, of course, no victory in sight for the war. So he needs to make a decision and move. And if he wants to continue the war, which all signs point to that, he needs more manpower. So that kind of indicates likely, at a minimum, if not a full public general mobilization, then a much, much more intense conscription. So mobilization via contracts and coercion and other methods that Russia has been using the last couple of years. Ceasefire, it appears not. There is almost no sign at all that Putin, the Kremlin, that Russia is interested in this at all. They've shown zero they've demonstrated offered zero overtures towards this. Plus, Trump can't make them come to the table anymore, and isn't really making them try to come to the table anymore either. So that's not moving. So you have to do something. On the one hand, don't forget intensifying the hybrid warfare within Europe, which we've seen, including, and Brightbird will get to this, Anders will mention what happened in Germany earlier this month in terms of the bomb at the Leipzig airport and other forms of hybrid warfare that Russia has been conducting more intensely lately. And this mobilization, the Kremlin has now actually officially called it a war, something that was illegal to do until the last month. Telegram being banned, the draft law being considered in the Duma on exit visas for men of military age. A number of signs. We're seeing increased job listings for working at recruitment centers and things like this. So seem to be moving in that direction. The problem is Putin has been delaying this because this is a massive political gamble, and frankly, maybe one of the most critical decisions of his entire presidency, going back for the last 26 plus years here. He has a huge problem. The war has become increasingly unpopular. According to state-run polling, 81% of Russians prefer a ceasefire along the current contact lines. 21% have said, only 21%, that they're satisfied with current government policies. Anecdotal evidence also indicates people don't want this war impacting their lives any further, particularly via mobilization, and would prefer that it ends for all these reasons that you can see here, which a mobilization would dramatically worsen. And just to do some quick math to understand the actual impact in Russia of how this would go down, if you compare to late 2022 with the initial partial mobilization at the time, when they got a bit over 300,000 citizens mobilized, for each one that they brought into the military, 4 formally exited Russia, right? And that's a little bit more difficult now because they've tightened border controls and things like this, other measures. But another, who knows how many, at that time, internally hid, of course, from the authorities, stopped showing up at work and different things that we also see here, by the way, in Ukraine. That's likely to happen at a much higher level. If Putin were to say, try to take 400,000 civilians to mobilize in Q4 of this year, you would likely see, I would say, at least 5-6 to 1 avoiding that, which means you're taking out not just 400,000 from the labor market, you're taking out over 2 million Russians from a labor market that is at its worst place since, as the central banker Nabulina has said, this is the worst labor market since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that'd be extreme, intense pressure on the economy and financial system. So just kind of walking through the chain of how things would actually work out and how dire the situation could become. Productivity, of course, is going to fall dramatically as you take out that much labor. The wages are going to have to rise dramatically as you have such scarcity of labor already that just worsens dramatically. Investment has already been in contraction for the last 18 months. Will worsen even further as you have less disposable revenue to devote to investment, particularly when you can't be taking out loans where interest rates are, say, approaching 20% in the civilian sector. Inflation, of course, continues to rise from all these pressures, particularly in an era of high energy prices emanating from the war in Iran. Interest rates up further. Bankruptcies already at their highest level since COVID, and prior to that going back to the 2000s. So the highest levels for bankruptcies in years already. Budget revenues then, the government spending would actually then be impacted from all of this. So then you would have, in the end, quite considerable financial repression as well. The government would have to get the funding somewhere to continue to finance this war. They can't access international capital markets. They're nearly exhausting their savings, so they'd have to put more pressure on the domestic banking system to buy up the government debt. However, the last 2 months, they've had 3 cancellations of government bond auctions and no plans for any future government bond auctions as the private market is no longer buying the bonds. So they already have that problem currently. That could only worsen, of course, under these quite dramatic conditions, in which case you're moving towards a potential financial crisis within Russia, not to mention a social crisis, because fundamentally you are severing the social contract whereby Russians used to live in a society with Putin where they could continue their normal lives with the war sort of on the back burner and not in front of their face. That will no longer be the case if it comes to a mobilization, due to, of course, the threat of losing their husband or their son, or as well, the economy collapsing and what happens to living standards. So very dangerous. And so this is really potential for causing a strategic shift here in the war. The debt servicing, just getting back to that, the actual financial problems, which are also being quite overlooked in the West, because everyone has said Russia has such low debt to GDP ratios. If you look at UK, look at Germany, UK 95% or so of debt to GDP, Germany 65% or so of debt to GDP ratio. However, the debt servicing in the budget, Russia, with only 20% of debt to GDP, is now paying about 10% of its budget towards debt servicing. UK and Germany are both paying around 8% of their debt, of their budget to debt servicing, just by comparison. So if you consider in Russia, nearly 50% of government spending is now going to defense and security, add another 10% that's going to debt servicing, and you see the pressure that it already exists in advance of a potential mobilization coming up. So majorly problematic here for Russia. All of that said, kind of putting together, going back to the scenarios that I've shown in each of the webinars, the major updates here are, firstly, under scenario 2, a Ukrainian victory, if you will, we have added a new scenario for the first time with an actual victory of getting back to 1991 borders. Very low likelihood, 10%, but this is now on the table, thanks to the strategic advantage that Ukraine has taken back really in the drone war towards the front and deep within Russia, and the potential for a mobilization and what could happen within Russia from that. So that's sort of the first major change. The second point is that Russian victory still is far away. If you define victory as what Putin truly wants, which is he wants to control Kyiv, he wants to bring Kyiv back under Moscow's fold, as he demonstrated in the invasion in February and March of 2022 when he tried to take Kyiv. That's still an extremely low likelihood possibility. But instead, what's risen slightly in likelihood is the scenario 2, land for peace deal. If either on the Russian side or on the Ukrainian side, because of the ballistic missile strikes, the pressure on the electrical grid, the attacks in the ports in the south and the macroeconomic problems from that, the attacks potentially on the water system within around Kyiv and its environs, this could then potentially expedite the land for peace deal, where it depends upon the terms, but we could move towards a ceasefire, either Russia asking for that or Ukraine potentially asking for that. And then lastly, scenario 4, because of what we've seen with this hybrid warfare, Putin getting more reckless, needing to end the war, potentially expanding the war against NATO, hoping to then overpower NATO. So that's also minimally risen in likelihood lately. So happy to take questions on that, but nonetheless, that's where we are with the broader, more geopolitical outlook. Moving into the economy here and business and investment trends, what we're hearing from businesses within Ukraine. So very briefly, consensus forecasts have actually moved down to where we have been since the beginning of the year, which is about 1% growth for this year. Forecast earlier had been around 2% or even higher, but now moving down, a lot of it because of the last 2 months with the pressure on the electrical grid and on the ports in the south, and this, as mentioned, is a major problem. It also has macroeconomic problems. You are worsening exports as imports remain quite elevated. And this is putting pressure on the hryvnia in particular, which is, of course, a problem. And then we are anticipating next year so pick up here in growth because we expect some form of ceasefire, let's say by about this time next year, if not earlier. So let's, of course, see, but that forecast would change and evolve if we continue and move through the winter and the war has not, of course, moved in that direction towards a ceasefire. Don't want to say peace, but towards a ceasefire. So all of that said, the primary question, what we hear, Andrew and I hear every day from businesses that we're talking to, from civilians on the streets, government officials, is about how do we survive this winter. We're already facing severe problems in July and August, well in advance of the winter. So how bad will this be? How bad will specifically how bad will the winter, the temperatures be? And that's important because the last winter happened to be the worst winter since the late 1990s, so over 25 years. So statistically speaking, this winter should not be nearly as bad as last winter, which would help out considerably 2023, 2024 were quite mild winters. Hopefully we have something like that, which would do a lot of the work for us. And again, matching that, the energy shortfall from Russia's strikes with the cold temperatures versus public resolve, how long that can last. Quite shockingly, polling 60% in August. This is after the June, July attacks that the civilians have been facing. Continue to solidly oppose ceding the Donbass, the rest of Donetsk, right, to Russia. 33%, which has been relatively consistent now for some time, support those concessions. When asked, so you can see here the last several polling, are you willing to endure the war as long as necessary? We saw a natural drop in those difficult times of January, February into March, April as well. We've seen a major pickup since then. And that's a key point here. One, temperatures improved. The suffering is not as bad, of course. But critically also, the last few months we've seen Russians suffer. We've seen living standards impacted within Russia, and there's more to go. So it's definitely a shot of adrenaline and building morale here on the ground within the population. And that's a key point to consider for this coming winter. The war was not going well really in any way last winter, and we just had to simply endure it. Now we feel like we can influence what's happening in Russia. We can cause trauma there, and ballistic missiles are going to start hitting Moscow and its environs here in Q4. So add that to the calculation. That might build some of Ukrainian resilience during this inevitably extremely difficult winter. So all that said, what I'll sort of leave you with here, this is give you an approximation of the nature and scale of the problem we're facing. We came into last winter with about 11 gigawatts of electricity generation. Add in 2.1 coming in from EU, and you still had a considerable gap with the peak demand of 18 gigawatts. Now, the first comment is that if we have a mild winter, we won't require 18 gigawatts of peak demand. So it could move towards, say, 16 gigawatts. So that would be beautiful if we could see 2 less gigawatts, which is considerable in need for this coming winter. We currently have about 9 gigawatts of domestic generation. They're trying to build about 6 plus. That's obviously, that should be gigawatts, not megawatts. Gigawatts of electrical production in advance of winter. That likely will not be hit, but they will likely produce some and more than what would be destroyed, is the expectation. So that will help close that gap, but we're going to go into winter with a considerable gap. These things will move. Maybe we only require, say, 17 gigawatts at the peak of winter in January and February. Perhaps we're able to domestically generate, let's say, 11 plus import 2. So there's going to be scarcity. There's going to be blackouts. It just depends on how much, but this is the current situation. So I'll finish there. I do want to, of course, move to the other speakers, and a lot of the security points that I mentioned, I will turn over to Blackbird. And as a reminder, if you're in Kyiv, our next event, our Q3 event, is on September 11th. So thank you very much. If you have questions, please do put that into the chat. Otherwise, I will hand it over to Anders. Anders, please.
Thank you, Mark. And hi, everybody. My name is Anders, and I'm a senior risk advisor at Brightbird, a Danish risk management company working in Ukraine. As Mark covered some of the points, then I will skip lightly over so we can get on to Sir Robert afterwards. Quick updates from the front line. We see heavy fighting around the Pokrovsk area, outskirts of the border, with Russian trying to push a little bit north, trying to gain access to the highway connection. Earlier this year, Chasiv fell, unfortunately, after some of the longest fighting seen during the war, which meaning that Russia is now pressing further on towards the high ground surrounding the city. From here, they would be able to increase the pressure on the Ukrainian forces in the Kostyantskaya and Slovyansk direction in the Donetsk Oblast. Across the entire frontline section from northeast down to the south, Russia have increased attacks on petrol stations, fuel trucks, and that meaning our clear advice is when traveling to the front lines or to the eastern parts of the country, make sure you plan properly with enough gasoline, but also if you're moving along the highways, see some of these fuel trucks, we strongly advise you to move away from them because they are a target of opportunity for single UAVs. Moving on to the aerial campaign, Mark covered some of it. During July, we have seen an aerial campaign towards the Odessa ports and Mykolaiv ports. They have been targeting port facilities, fuel depots, grain storage, transportation lines, trains, and etc. And notably, they have been using anti-ship and anti-radar missiles on an almost daily basis, combined with UAVs. This is something we haven't seen previously in the same scale and is something we follow quite intensely. There have been a decrease in the amount of UAVs overall in all attacks directed towards Ukraine. We believe it's because they are saving up, as to say, for the upcoming winter campaign, where we again will start to see maybe 600-700 UAVs per attack in an attempt to overwhelm Ukraine's quite effective counter UAV air defenses and thereby try to limit its effectiveness. As Mark also mentioned, then July saw an extreme increase in ballistic missiles use due to the shortage and of Patriots interceptor missiles. Ukraine have now again gotten a small supply. We have seen multiple ammunition depots blowing up throughout Q3. Probably this is one of the reasons for Ukraine's current predicaments or shortage of interceptor missiles, but is something that both Poland and the US have agreed with President Zelenskyy to counter and deliver more anti-air measures. Due to the heavy attacks on the ports, on ships in the Black Sea, we have now seen a lot of traffic by road and railway moving towards the border, giving up to 7-day waiting time. It's estimated that we have about 7,000 trucks in queue or in line waiting to get out of Ukraine at the moment, which heavily influence the border checkpoints. This comes together with the summer period started as stopping or the summer holiday stopping. So we see a lot of traffic on the border in general, both by buses, civilian cars, and by trucks. We have had in July and August a few special incidents. As you probably heard in the media, we have the Leipzig-Halle airport incident, where drones were found on the runway and near a Ukrainian cargo flight with explosives attached nearby. This linked with the Bundeswehr base intrusion 2 days later pushes towards the hybrid warfare that Russia is currently indulged in or involved in. As of yesterday, Putin was saying that if the West don't stop their seizure of the Shadow Fleet, they will increase retaliation in kind. No clear on what it is, but we have seen a lot of electronic warfare. We have seen a lot of jamming in the Baltic states, GPS spoofing. We have seen interference in both the German and French electorate. So it would be probably to link those kind of attacks, seeing them coming throughout the rest of the year. Closing off with the Armada weapon demonstration incident. As you have probably heard already, we had in Ukraine near Kiev a large defense demonstration of anti-drone and countermeasures, anti-air countermeasures, being attacked with up to 3 ballistic missiles. 1 got intercepted, but unfortunately 2 hit the training grounds, killing at least 10 and wounded hundreds. The head of the Armada Association have been detained on grounds of negligence. It has been confirmed that there were no clear coordination with the military and police districts or authorities, and there were only limited shelters and the place. There was 1 shelter for up to 300 people. What I'm getting at here is that if you tend to or want to visit these kind of events, which is hugely beneficial for Ukraine because you can link up the different businesses, it is really important that you maintain vigilance, see if anything comes up online from it. It was probably a breach of OPSEC combined with Russia's intelligence gathering that lead to this incident. So our strong recommendation is that you spend limited time at scene. When you have had the meetings or met the people that you wanted to meet or what you wanted to see, then leave the area. Don't tell anybody about what you're doing in Ukraine in general. Post it anywhere it gets itself. But sometimes even internal emails can get leaked and can pose a danger to your threat or to your travel. Sorry. So in short, in general, that was the security update from Ukraine covering this last few months. And I would now like to give the word on again to the next speaker.
General, that would be you. So please, your turn. You're on mute, sir.
There you go.
Yeah.
And am I echoing like everybody else has been?
No,
you're good.
No, good, because I've found it very difficult to follow what's been said. But between the 2 previous speakers, you've pretty well covered everything I thought I was going to say. So I won't be as long as I thought I'd be. I agree with all that has been said before. I could add a few points. I see no diminution in the stated war aims of both sides. I do not see at the moment grounds for compromise and ceasefires. Whatever the projected scenarios, I can't see why anybody is going to stop fighting at the moment. Both sides have adopted attritional strategies. Ukraine is successfully at the moment compensating for a lack of manpower with technology, but nevertheless, it is dependent in this attritional strategy on support from the West in whatever form that comes. Russia is equally attritional in its strategy, and all the facts that were spelt out of the need for support from China, Iran previously, North Korea now, the effect on the economy and so forth are all bearing down on this attritional strategy, and particularly the shortage of manpower. Both sides have successfully developed long-range attacks into the cities and infrastructure of the other side, with the consequences that have been spelt out. The primary impact from a purely military point of view is that both sides need to develop their air defenses. Ukraine's is primarily one of to defeat ballistic missile attacks and increasingly the jet-powered drones of the Russians. And Russia has the same problem, but in a different aspect, in that they have to cover a very wide area and defeat the drone attacks, and in time, if Ukraine developed them, Ukraine missile attacks. I leave you with just one point on this. The strategy of attrition is that if you adopt this strategy and you are smaller in numbers, economy, and so forth of your opponent, then you have to destroy a very great number of the other side to win this attritional battle. And that seems to me the greatest single weakness in Ukraine's position to date. On the battlefield, again, it's been covered in detail, really. The Russians have made some small gains, but of no great significance and at great cost in terms of manpower. Ukraine has, with their mid-range attacks and together with the advantage they have in the drone technology, I say the advantage, these technological advantages aren't constant, have defeated most of the Russian attacks and recovered territory that's been lost in previous months. And in particular, and has been outlined, they're threatening a significant threat to the defense of Crimea. And it is evident that both Russia and Ukraine, each in their own way, are trying to develop a capacity to maneuver on this modern battlefield where surveillance is all pervasive. The direction of this strategy and the actions on the battlefield to put it into effect was clearly disturbed by what occurred last month in Ukraine with the replacement of the defense minister and the chief of the general staff. And I don't see any great change in direction from the Kremlin at the moment. Much talk, but no change. The weakness in the case of both sides, really, but in particular in the case of Ukraine, for the reasons I argue, that if you're the smaller party in an attritional battle, you've got to have a sort of added extra. Ukraine has yet to develop the ability in its direction to take advantage of successes on the battlefield so that there is an accumulative effect. Think back. There was the very successful attack towards Kursk, what it was now over 2 years ago, and it was never exploited. There was the exceedingly successful attack on Russia's strategic air force, again, not exploited. There's this successful destruction in many respects of the capacity of Russia to supply its people in Crimea, but so far, to what end? And I do not see this operational direction taking place. In the face of this, we can see that Russia, and again, this has been discussed with all its possibilities, threatening to do something. We will wait till we've had the Duma elections, etc., and then we're going to really do something. I don't know that all the measures being suggested are either ors. You might get an answer that has bits of all of them. I think that since manpower is so clearly a problem, it's a problem for both sides, but in the Russian case, I suspect we may very well see, if not stated as clearly as this, the end of a special military operation and the announcements that the country is now at war, or the state is now at war. And for all the reasons Mark laid out, that's something of a gamble with the society as a whole. And this applies to both Ukraine and Russia. Your ability to fuel a war with men or manpower, men and women, however politically correct I'm supposed to be, you have to have popular support. And that seems to me to be the test of how much popular support, and it'll be different in each society because there's an element of coercion and so forth that will be part of this taking up of the manpower of the society. And that will be a judgment that in the end, it'll be Mr. Putin and the Kremlin that decide this. What will their people bear? And remember, it's not the Soviet Union. There isn't the Communist Party. There isn't the network of the party holding the society together, providing a coherence to the society. This society is, in my view, run on the basis of a criminal enterprise where each gang boss is taking his 10% of the gangs beneath him and paying his 10% to the man above. And that isn't going to be held together by the same rationales as the days of the Communist Party. And so I personally, as a Cold War warrior, if you like, I'm very doubtful of analysis that applies Western rationales to the thinking in the Kremlin. I think we must be very careful how we suppose Russia will decide. I think to finish, the tests for me in this coming winter, and you've covered all the problems of the winter, there must continue to be consistent, constant Western support for Ukraine, not only in billions of euros and so forth and weapons, but in directly countering Russia's in the economic and if I call it the security military field, in other words, the counter to what people call hybrid warfare. And maintaining the Black Sea trade. The West mustn't allow the Black Sea trade to falter for good economic reasons, if nothing else, and for feeding large chunks of Africa, which, if they don't get fed, then what we've seen in Spain and Morocco will just be the beginnings of much worse problems. Secondly, there is the air defense of Ukraine, particularly of the major cities and the infrastructure. And Ukraine needs as much help as it can possibly get if that is to improve. And then there is what I call the direction of the war. I think there is an acute need. It may have started in Ukraine with the change as a consequence of the attempts to bring things back to a rather more Russian control model. Then a change of direction on two particular lines, the development of technologies to compensate for a lack of manpower, and at the same time to get a grip of the manpower problem. And the second line is to develop an operational method that allows you to break out from this attritional strategy and start to take advantage of successes on the battlefield. And I think I've managed to say everything that no one else has said.
General, thank you so much. It was really insightful. I have a follow-up question, and this is what exactly you just said. We need to develop the technology. And my question is, before I ask the question, there is a little update from what is happening on the front lines. So recently, Ukrainians started using unmanned ground vehicles or robots that have become essential combat and logistic tools in the war. And this have become, as we understand, Russia has more manpower, but we compensate the excess of manpower by the enemy, by the drones. And the drone war has changed the war completely. And we believe there is a second stage of such a huge change is the use of unmanned ground vehicles. And recently, Ukraine armed forces ordered up to over 6,000 such robots, which can shoot, which can evacuate the wounded soldiers, and sort of. So what do you think, how this will develop the war, or how this will change the war dynamics in the near future?
I may have got there's such an echo that if I don't answer you precisely, it's because I haven't properly understood the question I think you've asked me is that Ukraine is deliberately, and in my view quite correctly, developing technology to compensate for the lack of manpower. And where is this taking us on the battlefield? Yes, I think they are doing that, and yes, I'm sure it's the right way to go. However, the manpower can't be understood as just a numerical on a sort of ledger like cash. It's what is this man doing? Now, if you actually examine a lot of technology, then you haven't necessarily saved manpower. You've removed the man from that place of danger on the battlefield. But behind the piece of technology, there are lots of men who have to build it, make it, repair it, supply it, etc., etc. And so when I've looked at this, you shift where the manpower is as much as save manpower. The second, and of course the numbers differ with the equipment and so forth. Secondly, the manpower you want alters. And the more you go into technology, the more you are looking for the people who the whole of industry and commercial life depend upon are not replaceable by machines. And so you have another problem. And if you want a model of this, look at the rise of security companies. And by this I mean companies that do things like security at airports and so forth. As we wish to spend less and less money on, for example, police forces, so businesses have started to buy in police forces, in so many words, but they don't do the sophisticated stuff. You haven't saved manpower in the end in this respect. You still need 3 men to guard that gate on a 24-hour basis. Or you put cameras there, and then you put 1 man wrong. You have to have 3 at least to watch the cameras. And then you have to have someone who's going to react to it. So suddenly you're almost always back to much the same numbers. They're just doing things in a different way. And the moment you get more sophisticated, the more educated, intelligent, expensive that person becomes. And it's a much more difficult problem than just saying, I have less people at risk on the battlefield.
Thanks, General. Does anyone have questions?
I'll ask a very quick one. I know we're at time. General, I was going to ask a question, but in the interest of time, I will pose it a little bit differently and to keep the response a little shorter as we're at time here. About mobilization, would you say, because I think what people don't understand is there's a spectrum for mobilization, right? There's a full mobilization, but then there's an industrial element too. What do you do with the economy? What do you do with industry? So could you just relatively briefly describe if Russia does not do a full mobilization, maybe some of the shorter or smaller elements that we could see instead?
I lost the middle bit. It got very garbled then.
Sorry. About mobilization, an industrial element, and if not full mobilization, what that looks like, a smaller mobilization.
Mobilization is be a bit careful of this word. It's actually the process of taking a society and changing it from peace to war, and for the government to take control of the railways and all the rest of it. And it stems from the 1800s. Based on, you could do mobilization because you took control of the society's manpower. And so what I think you're talking about is actually the how you manage a modern wartime economy, which includes producing your armed forces, and of course supplying them, is how do you apportion the manpower to achieve this? And so you then have to hit a next problem, which is that to a greater or lesser extent, this has to be understood as fair in the society. Now, each society will have a different gauge of fairness, but nevertheless, that requirement needs to be satisfied. So if you start to do this at all partially, then you enter into degrees of unfairness. And I don't know enough about a Russian society to say where that would lie. But it would, the end of one of the reasons Russia withdraws from Afghanistan is that the burden was increasingly thought to be unfair on the streets, particularly of Western Russia. And I would think that there's a risk of that if you start to enlarge the catchment, if you like. So you have to, if you're trying to, I mean, look at America in the Vietnam period. That was demonstrably unfair, and its unfairness to some extent was hidden by it being a ballot. But a ballot doesn't make it fair. It supposedly gives everyone a chance, or the same chance. But that was also clear that that wasn't the case. So I don't think there's an easy way of calibrating conscription. You either call everybody up and you take control of the manpower and you say that you, a graduate with this degree, or you in this firm is critical to the war effort, stay in that firm and go on working. But those people over there are not critical to the war effort, and they can become maintainers of tanks or whatever. But in the end, if you're fighting over ground, which is what's happening, you are going to have to occupy the ground. And you can do that with as much technology as they like, but a hell of a lot of boots are going to have to be there as well.
I agree. Thank you, General. Yeah, thank you for all the insights. Thanks everyone for joining us. Again, I'd like to remind thanks to our general sponsor, Plural's Bank, and we will see all of you at our September 11 event in Kyiv. If you are in Kyiv, we'll be happy to discuss the latest updates at the front and how we gonna. Is it going to be the last winter for us and following the negotiations? So thanks again. We will see you in about 4 weeks, and yeah, feel free to reach out to us at any time. General, thank you so much. Anders, thank you so much. See you guys next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.